Welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. William, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you. In our last episode, we talked about Carl Barney's first three essays from 2020, where he makes his best case for why he and Craig Biddle were unjustly treated by the Ayn Rand Institute. But it's his fourth essay where he really makes it less about his and Craig's treatment and more about why objectivism isn't growing fast enough. The title of the essay is ARI is Failing and Needs Our Help. Now, before we jump into things, I have to add as a postscript to the last show, we talked about how Craig Biddle hadn't responded to ARI's original piece on schisms when we found out that he had in fact responded a few days earlier. And while I don't want to go over the whole essay today, Biddle offers a quote from Ayn Rand from her essay, The Argument from Intimidation, that I think really blows a hole in ARI's claim that they owe nothing further on their moral condemnations of Barney and Biddle. Ayn Rand says, when one gives reasons for one's verdict, one assumes responsibility for it and lays oneself open to objective judgment. If one's reasons are wrong or false, one suffers the consequences. But to condemn without giving reasons is an act of irresponsibility, a kind of moral hit and run driving, which is the essence of the argument from intimidation. And it is, that to me is the most important part of this whole argument. You should be able to explain to someone why you believe someone else is worthy of a big negative judgment, or you're counting on a type of intrinsicism that implies just believe us if you value Ayn Rand. What else do you need? From that quote, she herself would reject any such attempts to use her to shield some from the moral responsibility of their accusations.
Well, I think that Carl Barney, being who he is, and Craig Biddle being who he is, they deserve some explanation for why ARI is attacking them and attacking their moral character, and their arguments and saying that they misrepresent the truth. I think that Carl Barney, they gave him the Atlas Award, and Craig Biddle was an intellectual for them, a speaker for them. So I think there's some history there that demands more of an explanation.
Yeah, I agree. And in that spirit, let's examine Barney's claim that ARI is failing and needs our help. And I mean, just by the nature of it, it is a claim worth refuting if it's refutable. I actually see maybe a sliding scale of three answers. Either ARI is succeeding, or it's making this kind of negligible process in spreading Rand's ideas, or it's out and out failing, or somewhere on that scale.
Well, yeah, so it's important to get the standard down. Like, what are we judging success and failure by?
Absolutely.
And Carl Barney offers some measurements and questions to answer in that regard. So I think that is an important thing to establish. What do we mean by success and failure?
Right, and we'll try to go over that as we get into these claims. Now, he says that he understands things that objectivists and major contributors to the Ayn Rand Institute know and have a right to know. He says if ARI were succeeding, he'd have nothing to say, but he claims that he can't in good conscience keep silent. So that's a different argument than you're standing up for the injustice to Craig's reputation or his own, but he probably sees them as intertwined issues.
Yeah, I mean, he sees there's some objective criteria that he sees, and he thinks that some of that is related to their schism with Biddle, and there might be something there. There might be a actual factor in whether they succeed or fail. I think it's related to how they relate to both their faculty and the public. who might side with one side or the other, with Biddle or ARI or Barney or ARI.
Or maybe they want to be friends with both.
Right. And then if ARI has a position that they don't like, that affects ARI's relationship with the public or with a segment of the public, and then that will affect their failure or their success.
Right. Well, Barney says that he tried to explain to the board, but to no avail, and that's what causes the need for him to make a statement to the public. And he says he's going to lay the facts out, but says we can investigate and decide for ourselves. And to some extent, ARI has said the same thing, but they've given us a lot less facts and said, nothing else should be needed. Now,
I don't think either side has given us very many facts, actually. I think Barney, what Barney does in his article is he gives us what should be measured, like revenues, audience, influence, whether they've achieved their goals, but he doesn't really break that down and give us the evidence for his conclusions. He just makes the conclusions. And so that's one issue I have with the article, is that the research wasn't there or presented, and that kind of reflects ARI's method as well, as they just give you their conclusions and don't offer much evidence, if any at all.
Well, that's true, but I mean, he's saying look at the results, and that he still, even though even at each time he releases public information, he at least says that I'm forced to do this because either I tried to talk to the board or I tried to, tell them that Craig was being maligned. And so he also claims that ARI is seriously failing in promoting Ayn Rand and objectivism, which is, I think, one of the most substantive charges. And he says his goal is to encourage change at ARI, which, that makes sense. Since he got kicked off the board, he at least wants the people that voted him off gone. I'm sure he sees that as related to, the same people that kicked him off are responsible for the movement not growing enough. So, but he goes back and he says this started around 2015, that he was giving $4 million a year, and then Yaron came and asked for more, which, I mean, that's not that unreasonable. It sounds like many nonprofits. But Barney, in response, asked for a strategic plan. He says he could see ARI's influence waning and debated with Yaron on improving ARI's strategy. Now, this is another example of something not arbitrary. Barney either expressed concern with strategy and influence and wrote to them about it, or he didn't. ARI doesn't want to answer.
Well, I think Yaron did admit in a clip you might be showing that Barney had started complaining for the last couple of years.
That's
so I think it's established by both sides that he did talk about these things and bring them up. And then at some point they reached a crescendo and he got booted off the board. But
Right.
I don't think it's questionable that ARI is denying that he brought these things up, because Yaron admitted it.
Okay. Well, Barney said that the current strategy was spending millions of dollars every year developing nascent intellectuals with a goal of having each of them writing a book. I guess, if you build it, they will come, or if you write it, they will come, they will buy it as the strategy. He says that a few of them did write books, but that they didn't sell very many outside of the ones Barney bought for distribution.
Yeah, and that's a hard thing to measure because I don't have access to book sales information or data or stats, but just going by what the general vibe is, it doesn't appear that these books that have been written by ARI intellectuals have reached any great success. I think Leonard Peikoff's books are the most successful,
sure,
because of his popularity. But the books by lesser known objectivist intellectuals at ARI. I don't think they make many waves anywhere, and I'm sure that it's true that Barney or other donors, their money went to purchasing books to
then give
send
out. Yeah.
to then give out to CEOs or college professors or something like that.
Sure. Now, as a piece of circumstantial supporting evidence, here is Yaron from 6 months ago trying to raise money to have Don Watkins co-author a book on Yaron's own take on rules for life.
And yeah, I'm curious how many of you would like to see Yaron Rules for Life be turned into a book, and I'd be curious how many of you would be willing to support turning Yaron Rules for Life into a book financially. How many of you would be willing to put money behind it so I can pay a co-author to help me do this?
So if Yaron is raising money for the book, it means he probably doesn't have huge expectations for the profits of the sales being enough to pay for his co-author.
Right. And he doesn't want to pay out of his own pocket because it would be a losing investment. He knows that. So he expects his audience to crowdfund for him or give him money so he can support whatever Don Watkins is going to charge him for writing the book. This is standard practice. I know that. I mean, Yaron says he's not much of a writer, and he's a speaker, so he needs someone to write the book for him. And he's not, but he can't project a way to make it profitable, right? So he still wants to get some literature out there, but he doesn't know how to make it profitable, and so that's a problem.
Yeah, and if it's true of Yaron, I mean, how much more is it true of these lesser known intellectuals?
Well, the fact is, a lot of objectivist literature is not a profitable endeavor. There's not a huge market for it.
Which is related to the growth of the movement.
Right. But I'm not sure it needs to be profitable, but it does need to be important. So if it is a critically important book, then someone will come along and finance it, and it'll help grow the movement. I don't have a problem with that. I just have an issue with intellectuals who can't write books, asking someone else to write their book for them. That seems like a waste of effort. If this book is critically important, it should be written by someone who can write it. So I don't know. If it's Yaron's Rules for Life and Don Watkins writes it, why is it Yaron's Rules for Life?
Well,
should be Don Watkins and Yaron Brook's Rules for Life.
Yeah, maybe he'll give him equal credit if it gets that far. But another part of the strategy Barney claims was for Yaron to give lecture tours around the world. And Yaron likes to lecture. I mean, he started out, I remember, organizing lectures in the 90s, which I think is part of how he came to know all the big objectivist speakers and probably why Leonard saw him as a go-getter. And good for Yaron for turning his love of travel into a career. I just think there's more to spearheading a movement than, just doing the things that are already in your wheelhouse.
Right, but there's a division of labor, so you can understand why Yaron wants to focus on speaking around the world. That's his strong suit. So again, I don't have a huge problem with him traveling around on ARI's dime or the donor's dime. I just hope that that's the best use of the money. And if there's not a huge attendance or a huge demand for such a thing, and he has to, try to generate the demand artificially, I'm not sure that's a valuable use of money. And
Right.
it sounds like there's a lot of waste going on when he travels. But I'm sure there's some places like maybe Israel or some places in Europe where there's a big demand, and it's justified that he goes there.
How about we try to create a big demand in America?
Well, that's another issue that we're probably going to get to is what happened to the campus club speaking network. When I was in college, I saw a couple ARI intellectuals come to my college and speak. And I don't know if that happens anymore. I don't hear about it.
Yeah, I remember some from 25 years ago as well. Now, to your point, Barney says that he proposed courses on Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff's books, developing the ARI campus and building a strong academic center with what he hoped would be 1,000 students annually. And because of all this, because they're still talking about wanting to travel and do books, he says he concluded that leadership at ARI had a flawed and failing strategy for effecting meaningful intellectual and cultural change and had no interest in developing a new strategy, which is consistent with my main complaint that, they seem to think that just doing more of these graduate classes is still the only answer to changing the culture.
Yeah, and this brings me to one of my points, which I think relates to the whole student outreach program. And so right now they're starting basically at the high school level with the essay contests and the free books to teachers program.
Right.
And that's been going on for quite a while now. I think that when they came up with that idea, it was there was a slight flaw to it, because I think they should begin earlier. They should begin with parents of small children, trying to reach parents and trying to reach elementary school or even kindergarten teachers.
The Simpsons already did Ayn Rand School for Toddlers.
Well, they have a point. There's a reason why, Christians, they start early. They have elementary schools. You hear of like Catholic high schools and Catholic elementary schools and Lutheran schools. So when you're trying to change a culture, I don't think you can start at the high school level and expect huge results. You got to start earlier to get the parents motivated to teach their children certain principles like, objectivity and reason and self-interest and develop. And so that's the problem with ARI is they haven't developed a parenting until recently with maybe Lisa Van Dam. They haven't developed a parenting philosophy. And
Yeah.
that's something that I think is critical. It should be a critical element to their programs.
Yeah, I would like to see that developed. I don't know if that's causing them not getting more response out of colleges now when they were getting more response 30 years ago, though.
But I don't think it's really true that they were getting more response 30 years ago. I think they didn't
I was
really
in
start
a campus club 30 years ago.
Well, in terms of campus clubs, possibly.
25.
Well, you may have a point. I mean, I don't know how many campus clubs they have now. It's a odd thing. I mean, I did some research before this episode just to see, the trend over, many decades now of ARI programs. And I noticed that in 1996, which is when the Wayback Machine first documented their website, they were boasting of over 100 objectivist clubs at universities. And now I don't hear
What
much
year?
about it. That was 1996.
That sounds plausible for that time.
And, that's when I was in college. And I was introduced to objectivism through a campus club. But now I don't hear too much about it. Recently, I think they've said they have like over 40 campus clubs. So it's not clear how many they have, how many are actually active, what they're doing. So that's one aspect of potential decline or failing. They might be failing in the campus club area.
Yeah, and I think that is true. That's one of Barney's charges. He says that, ARI's basic strategy was to develop a few nascent intellectuals and to support Yaron's travels and lectures around the world. And, we touched on this. Is there any evidence of Yaron being a travel bug? I mean, I did a quick cursory search to see if I could find any clips of him showing a passion for travel. And to be fair, this is late 2020 during COVID, but I mean, you can see that he really does have a passion for it.
Oh, and my big goal for next year, drum roll, please. I want to travel. I want to give a talk in London, and I want to give a talk in Tbilisi, and I want to give a talk in Rio de Janeiro, and I don't know, Mexico City and Bogota, Colombia. So and maybe I don't think 21 is the year. Maybe 22. I want to go give a round of talk in Asia. So I want to get on a plane and go give talks. I mean, you guys are nice, and 2 dimensions is cool, but you can't beat 3-dimensional people.
So he's getting bored with the 2-dimensional internet people.
I appreciate him being able to show that unadulterated love for travel. I just, there's more aspects to it than just that.
Yeah, he's got a long list of places he wants to go to there.
Right.
Those places might be where he's achieved some traction in the past, or they might just be places he wants to visit. I don't really know the details there. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, my main point was just to say that, Barney talking about him just wanting to travel isn't just one of those arbitrary charges. I mean, he didn't just make it up out of whole cloth. He thought it from somewhere.
Yeah, I know from my history at ARI that he does like to travel. He says it himself, and he is very effective sometimes, when he's talking to people. So I don't see that as a huge problem. It can be a benefit. I just think it should be done in a more rational, logical way, like trying to make the most efficient use of the money that is spent on that aspect, and find some sort of measurements. I hope they're measuring the success of these trips in some way, some statistics. And if they're not, then I think they should be thinking about that. But yeah, I'm not a big critic of traveling. I think it's important to spread the word. That's one of the main missions of ARI, is to spread objectivism. And, it's important to spread it around America and, Canada, but it's also important to, spread it elsewhere, because there are potentially many rational people all around the world.
I'm not against travel per se, but it should be, its effectiveness should be analyzed. I think that's some of what Barney was saying. I mean, part of what the travel thing was just to say that there's, how much of a basis there is when both sides are giving us incomplete information. Another one of his charges, he says that ARI continues to run the Objectivist Academic Center, but that it shows very little versus the time and money spent. When ARI speaks about 100-year plans, I think that's a fair charge.
Yeah, that there should be some sort of survey or assessment of the OAC, because I was looking into this statistic as well. And in 2011, they boasted of having 140 students in the OAC. And now in 2021, they're claiming only 100. So that's clearly a drop from total students. And another factor is that they've gone from a 4-year course to a 2-year course. So they've chopped it in half, and basically now the first 2 years are OAC, and if you are still interested in being a professional objectivist, they try to get you into the Objectivist Graduate Center, which is the next 2 years. So they've gone from having 6 years of training to 4 years. So I don't know if it's become more efficient, or
Right.
there's just less demand for a 4-year
Or if there's
OAC
less
course.
content.
Well, there's got to be less content, I guess, unless they found a way to shove
make
4 years of content into 2 years. That would be quite a monumental feat of
and
efficiency.
probably worth bragging about how you did it. But he also, Barney also says that ARI didn't want to change, and that Yaron declared bluntly to him, "I have my strategy and I'm not going to change it." I mean,
yeah, this strategy is, I think it's the funnel strategy. So if you go through the website history, you'll find this graph they made for the funnel. And when I was at ARI, they called it the 2020 pipeline or something like that. And it's, so it starts with finding high school students who are interested in writing the essay, and then they write a brilliant essay, and then they get recruited into the OAC, and then they move on to the OGC if they want to have a professional career in academia. And then they get grants and fellowships and things to support their career, and they try to place these intellectuals into the universities. So this is the funnel where they're trying to get young people into academic careers, and that apparently has failed. It's 2022 now. Where are all these intellectuals? There's a few of them that they list, I think, in the recent annual report. They listed 4 or 5 of them that they got into academia. What is it? Tara Smith, Robert Mayhew, Daryl Wright, and Greg Salmieri. So they have a few that they brag about, but I don't know where all these other ones are supposed to be. How is the funnel working? I think they've basically just abandoned the funnel, abandoned the pipeline, and now they're trying something else.
And that gets into some of Barney's later charges as well, about being able to name 5 prominent objectivist intellectuals.
Maybe he came up with that number because ARI didn't even name 5. I think they named 5, but I only wrote down 4.
Well, I mean, even, what level of, someone that you've actually heard of in the culture after 20 years, I think was his point. But Barney, he ultimately, to his credit, details ways of measuring success. He says, how can we know if an organization is succeeding? Well, its revenues grow, its audience and influence increase, and it achieves its goals. That's the basis he says that ARI is not succeeding, saying that it's fast becoming a failed organization. He says, ask yourself, are more or fewer people reading Atlas Shrugged today than 10 years ago? Are effective new intellectuals being developed? If so, where are they and what are they doing? Is ARI attracting more or fewer young people to the objectivist movement? How about Campus Club and Strive Undercurrent? Given this course, where will ARI be in 5 years? So he's really dropping the hammer with those questions.
Yeah, I like how he asked questions, but he didn't really answer hardly any of them, I don't think. So I actually looked up some of the revenue information that I could find online going back to 2011. So in 2011, they had revenues of 8.5 million. And then it kind of fluctuates between 8 or 9 million. Some years it was 10 or 11. And then in 2019, they hit a low of 7 million. And then I don't have information for 2020 or 2021. So I don't really know what the revenues are. In the annual report for 21, they listed 17,000 something as revenue, but I'm not sure if that was in millions or
It-
hundreds of thousands. So
It's
I'm not sure what the
possible.
revenue was.
I think I remember Yaron right after these charges came out, he said we've got more money than we've had, and I know they've tried to diversify their donor base.
So it's possible last year they had 17 million, and they must have gotten some substantial contributions from their big donors to
Do
reach
they
that
count
amount.
PPP as revenue?
Possibly. I don't, how much did they get? How much did they get for PPP?
It was I think it was somewhere around 500,000 if I remember correctly.
Okay, well that's not going to bump them up to 17 million. But
no,
I really can't say what they got in the last couple of years because I didn't understand their annual report number.
Yeah, and that's part of transparency. Now, I want to say that in one of the past Yaron shows, he counters that the movement has grown over the past 20 years, at least by his measures.
Objectivism hasn't lost ground in the last 20 years. Objectivism is far, far larger, far bigger today than it was before, in pretty much every dimension. Book sales peaked 10 years ago, but all those people who read the books and the movement and the activity and the amount of content and the amount of stuff being produced and the amount of speaking and the amount of just engagement, of the objectivist movement is, light years greater than it was 20 years ago. I was there 20 years ago. So no, that's complete nonsense.
So Yaron is saying that it's light years ahead of where it was 20 years ago. But the only fact he gives us is that sales peaked 10 years ago.
Right.
So I'm not sure what he expects us to believe, with that answer. Like he doesn't give any supporting facts for his conclusion. I wish I could find them on my own. I mean, one thing I like about what ARI is doing now is they have started these classroom talks to, I guess, high school classrooms.
Right.
I think that's a good move. I think that came about because of the whole COVID era thing where schools shut down. You couldn't physically go to school, so they had these virtual classes. And so now ARI intellectuals are talking to the students virtually over the internet. And I think that is a good program. I think that is going to build, and they're hoping for 100 talks this year. So that's kind of an exciting thing. But other than that, what have
they hope for 100 talks. I mean, they may only get 20.
They got 40 last year.
Okay.
And then now they're expecting 100 this year. I think the problem is demand, or supply. They have a huge demand for these talks, but they don't have the supply. Other than that, what else has caused this light year jump in success? I don't really know.
He seemed to believe it was these people that read Atlas Shrugged 10 years ago. But, I used to work in sales, and there was a slogan. It was like, new accounts are the lifeblood of sales, because, you need to keep bringing in new accounts for the old ones that may die or just not want to use your product anymore. And so in that sense, yes, it's great they're doing these campus clubs and getting whatever penetration they're getting, but he just seemed a little cavalier about the fact that book sales peaked 10 years ago. That is an issue.
Right, especially in the era of digital books. So now everyone's transitioning to paperless. So I'd like to hear how many digital versions of the book have they sold? I think that was in one of the reports, but I forgot the number.
I see a lot of stats in their annual reports that I don't want to say they're cherry picked, but they seem like they're, like hours of content watched, which just seems, it just doesn't seem like one of the most fundamental measures. I mean, someone can just be hitting play and going in a different room or something.
It's definitely not a fundamental measure, but it is an interesting statistic. But that's for the YouTube stuff, right? Or the
Right.
videos
Yeah.
they have on their website. So it's website-based statistics. But what I'd like to see are the hard statistics, like how many new intellectuals have you produced? How many intellectuals have you gotten into universities? Or how many students have you spoken to at high schools? So that would be interesting. If they are following the funnel strategy still, then I would like to see more statistics on how the funnel is working.
And they should reference it and say, our plan from 20 years ago has worked.
Yeah. But again, I think I read something or heard something somewhere where they basically abandoned that strategy. Because it
But
really,
that's how it
it's
happens. They
been,
just stop talking about it.
yeah, because
They
it's
just don't.
been 20 years now, and clearly we don't have the results. So
Yeah. Well, Barney breaks down further several categories for measuring success. He starts with contributions. He says revenues were trending down for the last 10 years. Now, again, this was 2020, so that it may be that, it was what he was saying was true then, and they've come back since then, like your numbers were suggesting.
well, I think he makes a mistake there, because they weren't actually trending down the whole time, so it fluctuates. It was apparently
Being flat is, can be bad for a
wasn't
for-profit
necessarily,
business.
but it wasn't necessarily flat. It was fluctuating and gradually going up until 2018. So they reached like this peak in 2018, and then it dropped dramatically in 2019. And then again, I don't know the years 2020 or 2021. So I don't know what happened there, but it's not a clear trend down. So I question that, because
Okay, but I mean, it's not like it's that false that it was actually shooting up during that time.
well, it definitely wasn't shooting like skyrocketing.
But there were some years that were good and some that were bad. It was just kind of inconsistent. But he's looking at the long-term trend, and that's fine. That's a fair point to bring up, and
It's just fluctuating. Some
okay.
years, some donor probably couldn't give a couple million, and so it dropped.
Now, speaking of flat to down, he says the number of people attending OCON has been flat to down beginning 10 years ago. He says that OAC has fewer actual students than 10 years ago. He says few graduates have made substantial contributions to the advancement of objectivism. This is where he bets you can't name 5 having an impact. I mean,
so I think he's
Alex
he's
Epstein.
Yeah, he's correct on that account. I think he's correct on the OAC based on my research. And for OCON, he might be correct, because in 2011, they boasted of having 500 average attendees for OCON. I don't know how many years that average was over, but it doesn't seem like they have 500 now. I don't know what the statistic is now. Do you know how many they got last year?
I don't off the top of my head, but
it wasn't in the annual report that I read. So
again, we
really
know
sure.
It's not growing by leaps and bounds.
Well,
at the very least,
I don't think they have 1,000. If they were getting more and more every year, they'd probably be giving those numbers.
But I mean, Yaron was saying they're growing gangbusters the last 20 years.
Yeah, I don't think it's true. Well, certainly not light years of success. I mean,
right, like people talking about Ayn
exaggeration.
Rand in a positive way in the culture, for example.
Yeah, I mean, but Yaron likes to exaggerate. So,
well, you like you said, you think they both did. So now for number 3, Ayn Rand book sales. He says Ayn Rand book sales in the U.S. are down over the last 8 years. He thinks this may be the most damning stat of all, as it's not even part of their strategy.
on the book sales, I think that's a result of ARI not purchasing hundreds of thousands of books. They, it looks like they were buying around 300 or 400,000 books a year. And then in 2015 through 2020, it dropped to about 190,000 per year, according to the annual report that I just read. That Tal was talking about how they doubled. So last year was doubling the average over the last 5 years. And he said that last year they bought 380,000. So you do some math and you get, 190,000 average between 2015 and 2020. So given that, you would expect the total sales of Ayn Rand's books to also lower over that time because ARI wasn't purchasing as many.
Yeah, I just don't want to see her books get into the category of these other nascent intellectuals where someone's having to buy a bunch of them on the side and then they're just sitting like some, E.T. Atari game that just sits there because no one wanted it and it's already free. I mean, it's one thing to give out these books, but we want to give them out to people who have a fair shot of reading them.
Yeah, well, I think they're all requested. So they get a lot of requests from teachers for book sets, and then they purchase the amount they need to send out. So I don't.
You know that? I don't know that.
That's the way it was when I was working at ARI. Okay. I don't know. They might have a warehouse full of books, but I never experienced anything like, over purchasing like that. I don't think they would do much of that either. I think they just get these requests. They get a lot of requests from teachers and then they buy the books they need.
But that means that some of the sales being down is just genuine, less people buying it as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a lot of that too. But when you consider that, I think on average, there's like 1 million books sold, Ayn Rand books sold a year. Well, a large percentage of that is ARI purchasing over 100 or 200,000 books. So
okay, well, it'll be. I guess they'll at least get a discount. The news from the last couple of months is that Leonard Peikoff has willed the rights to Rand's books to the Ayn Rand Institute. So they'll be getting the royalty.
Yeah. Maybe they'll get a bigger discount. I don't know how much royalty they get because these books are discounted. So
yeah,
I don't know.
That's it's a fair question. But now he also talks about morale. Barney claims that morale in the movement, and again, this is from 2020, is bad from Ankar and Yaron causing division and from too much focus on politics and Trump in particular. Now, I do agree. I think ARI has lost people because of Yaron's just, Captain Ahab mentality towards Trump, that he just has to be defeated at all costs. And, it did affect people that actually see the left as a greater threat. Plus, how great is morale if they needed to publish a long piece trying to justify all their past schisms?
Right. Well, there's a difference between morale at ARI and morale among ARI supporters. So we would have to measure this by how much money they're getting or how many donors they're losing. And then there's another measurement we could potentially figure out by how much staff are they retaining, why are staff leaving, or why are they unhappy? But that would be a difficult thing to measure. You have to interview them. So,
and they've been told not to talk or ask questions.
Yeah. So I think Barney's
matter.
trying to focus on the supporters, their morale. Like people who formerly supported ARI, they're losing morale They don't like what ARI is doing. And you can measure that, by people who have voiced, like us, who have voiced disagreement or criticism, things like that. So I think there's some evidence to that. And I think this is one category where Barney offers a little bit of evidence in terms of how things went down with the schism between him and Biddle, and him and Biddle versus ARI.
Yeah. And it is, even if things can be tough to measure, it's still good to try. I think that's, part of objectivism, that everything is knowable, everything is measurable. And so but then he goes on and he talks about ARI campus. Barney says that he planned and financed an ARI campus, and after spending $5 million on a software system and video studio, it all collapsed. I mean, he says he wanted paid classes, but ARI was giving everything away for free on YouTube. And that one, I'm not, it's a difficult, whether it's best to do the model where you're giving things away and getting them in the door that way, or charging for their books and tapes like the old model when Ayn Rand was still alive.
This is an important issue, because what has ARI done with that money? And it looks like all they really did was group a few programs together and call it Ayn Rand University. So the Ayn Rand University is a student outreach program, plus the OAC, plus OGC, plus their faculty and the fellowships they offer. So they're basically combining these elements and calling it something else, like Ayn Rand University. It's all, they've finally kind of have this new division of ARI, which and under this heading Ayn Rand University are all these other programs. But it's not really, like Barney's saying, it's not really a university as we think of a university. It's not a school.
He says $5 to $10 million more was spent on ARI campus, and it still doesn't produce. And he claims that ARI squandered his multi-million-dollar investments. And saying that they squandered his investments may be his most substantive charge, that I would think would inspire curiosity in the more objective and less tribal. I mean, the tribal being those who just emotionally need ARI to succeed so much that they just don't want to question the management over anything. I mean, did they make mistakes in supplier choices? Is everyone just covering for each other if a vendor doesn't deliver quality? Is it still arbitrary if Barney has receipts?
Well, this is one of the problems with being a nonprofit organization, is you don't expect profits. So I'm not sure what Barney expected. I don't know what the agreement was exactly. Was it to produce an actual physical university that gives out accredited degrees? I'm not sure what he expected or what ARI promised. So I'm not really in a position to judge that.
They're still not sure if they want to do accreditation now.
Yeah, I'm not, and I'm also not sure how much of a market there is for such a thing as a physical objectivist university. They sort of tried that with Gary Hall's, what was it called? Founders College or something like that. And that utterly failed. So I'm not sure, what Barney wanted and what ARI wanted, and what the disagreement was there.
But even, just to, can they at least admit mistakes were made about certain suppliers or vendors when, they're spending $5 million and they don't really have that state-of-the-art system they were promised? And that either happened or it didn't.
Right. I don't know who was working on it and what they produced. So I don't know how to answer that.
But that's another rationale for at least, making some answer to the charges, especially if you're going to be condemning Barney for calling him unobjective.
Yeah, but here they could claim, ARI can claim that Barney's making an arbitrary accusation because he didn't properly, back up or give the
They-
evidence for his claim. So
My
he's
whole
claiming
point
he
is they
squandered
use
something.
the arbitrary charge as an excuse not to have to answer.
No, it's just pointing out that Barney didn't make a valid argument. He didn't.
I mean, he's saying that $5 to $10 million was squandered on ARI campus, putting away putting the software system and video studio that wasn't done right. I mean, it's basic competence. Did you hire a good supplier? Did you lean on them when they weren't performing, or sue them, whatever was necessary? And I don't think they're going to call everything he's saying arbitrary, and they basically have.
Well, if they made use of the video studio, is that squandering it? Maybe
Well,
they just used it the way he didn't want them to use it the way they did.
That's where I think they could say his chart, we understand what he's talking about, but it's just, they would rather just not answer the charges at all than actually say, yeah, we understand what he's talking about there, but that was a mistake. And we, when that person didn't handle the money right, we sued them. And, Barney's issue is with the guy doing the video taping, not us, or whatever the case is, but they're just arbitrarily calling it arbitrary because it's a way to not have to answer. But I do want to run through these last couple of ones that he uses as standards. He says that Barney claims the quality of work done at ARI is not to the standard of 20 years ago, and that Ocon and the quality of writing overall has deteriorated. Now that one can be somewhat subjective, but it's related to why the writing isn't attracting more people to just buy the book spontaneously.
Maybe. I mean, it could be that the culture is just deteriorating too quickly, but I do tend to agree with him. I don't think the writing, at least the thinking, is better than it was 20 years ago. There's been some progress in some areas, I think, but in a lot of areas that are important, it's gotten just a lot worse. Like, I completely disagree with open immigration, open borders, the idea that both political parties are still equally bad, that there's several areas where I disagree, but I don't want to go into all of them.
Yeah.
I just think that what Barney doesn't do, though, is tell us where he thinks the writing has gotten worse. Like specific, I think, he did mention one Ocon course that was very bad on aesthetics. I don't know which one he's referring to. So I couldn't look it up, but he just kind of generally says there was this aesthetics course that was bad. So
I saw
give one example.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it as related to him being such a friend and fan of Leonard Peikoff, and he feels like he wants there to be next Leonard Peikoffs or other people with that level of quality. I think some of the closed approach plays a role in that, because these intellectuals don't want to say anything that isn't confirmed objectivism, and so that hinders them too.
Closed in terms of organizing and relating to people and forming relationships. I think, that's bad. I think that this is one of my arguments against ARI, is that they're not interested in their dissidents or their critics enough. They don't engage with them enough. They don't debate. They don't debate the hard issues like the schisms. So I would like to see more of that, more uniting, or coalitions if possible. You don't have to be buddies, but the organizations themselves should try to work together and move the philosophy along. at least the applications of the philosophy, or
Yeah.
trying to. So I like to, at this point in my life, I'm trying to find errors and trying to correct things and try to, fix problems that I see with the philosophy. Because I think overall it's a great philosophy and I agree with it. But I think there are minor issues or applications that have flaws and don't really work. So if you are of like the ARI mentality where you're just promoting objectivism, then you might be promoting a false idea, and you need to stop that. Your goal should be promoting the truth, promoting objective reality, and
Yeah.
if
And
there's
appreciating that Rand had so much of it right.
yeah, you can appreciate Rand's genius, but then also figure out where she went wrong. Like in
Absolutely. I
science,
agree.
you see
Mhm.
Einstein or Newton, and they were geniuses and came up with brilliant ideas, but they had little flaws here and there. And so there needs to be,
Knowledge builds. It's, yeah, but they move the ball forward. And, but yeah, his Barney's last standard is size. And you touched on this because he says in 2020 that staff was half of what it was 10 years ago.
yeah, I'm not sure that's correct actually, because I did look at the website history, and they had a staff of, I think, 15. When was that? In 2001, I think they had a staff of about 15. And then in 2009, recently, 2022, it looks like they have a staff of over 40. So I don't know where he gets that information.
He may
Like
have
how,
been measuring from right when he left and some people left with him.
there may have been a big drop during COVID,
Yeah,
but it looks like they've done some rehiring.
that makes sense. So after these 7 measures, Barney says, these are the results of my contributing a total of $40 million to ARI. I think this gives me a right to ask for an accounting and to urge for improvements. That seems reasonable. ARI doesn't agree, but it's 2 separate things. The right to an accounting, they're going to use all their private internal stuff, but to urge for improvements is something that even they should get behind.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, they do have an annual report and they do some accounting. They report statistics and successes in their programs. And I think they should do more of that. I'd like to see better measurements. Some of the old measurements brought back, especially campus clubs. I don't really know what's going on with campus clubs. I'm not sure where to find that information on the website, if it's there. I don't know if I have to call ARI and talk to somebody. But it'd be interesting to see how the campus club program is going now that we have all this woke crap going on the university campuses. How are they handling the wokeism on campus? Are they still supporting
campus clubs? Really, just 2 guys that both secretly talk about liking Ayn Rand.
Well, I'm sure there's some are small, some are big, but it would be nice to know, like, how many actual campus clubs are they supporting?
Well, the fact that you're having such trouble tracking it down may be a little bit of a clue.
Possibly. It might just be my ignorance or my failure in research. I don't know. I'm not making any hard claim here. I just, I think there has been, from what I can gather, there was an initial decline in the campus clubs for some reason. They started with 100 or claiming 100, and then they dropped down to below 100, and were started just claiming over 40. So I don't really know how many they have. So that would be an interesting measurement.
Look, for anyone I've been in the movement on and off for 30 years, and I there used to be just not even campus clubs, objectivist clubs in pretty much all the cities I moved in, whether it was in Florida or Pennsylvania or Missouri. And but then, more recently, it's tougher to find local objectivist clubs. And, that's anecdotal, but I would suspect that many people have gone through a similar experience. Barney,
I've never really been a big community group joiner, but I did enjoy the campus club, because when you're
Yeah.
on campus, it's hard to find like-minded people. But when you become an adult and you get a job and you have other things going on in your life, it's hard to join the separate community just for your philosophy when there's so many resources online. You can go to objectivist forums and talk to people, or Facebook groups. So I think a lot of that social activity that used to occur in person in your local community is now happening virtually online, in some sort of social media network.
Yeah, I think that's going on. I don't know if that's the whole reason. I mean, there are even smaller online forums in some ways with how big the internet is. But Barney goes on to say that he thinks ARI is hurting because of their broken agreements with he and Craig, and also because of their non-objective approach to ideas. But, is ARI hurting 2 years later? I mean, they do have donors. They seem content to grow slowly at their own pace, with just doing more OAC classes is the way to change the culture in the long term. But I'm not sure that ARI is hurting just because of their broken agreements. I know that that's probably the way Barney wants to see it, but I do think it's part of an overall. They'd rather go into their, this infighting can be a type of self-censorship. It's like the left tells us we're not allowed to criticize this and that and whatever else. And then it's like, well, the only thing we can criticize are other people in the liberty movement or other conservatives.
Well, that's probably part of it. I know I lost a little interest in ARI when they started going hard against Trump, and actually doing videos about how Trump was evil and all of this. And so I think that them getting political that way during election time is not exactly in their interest, if they want to retain a lot, more of their donors.
You're
But they
absolutely
do,
right.
but they do seem to be, they see themselves as choosing to be principled, over, appeasing their donor base. So there's some integrity there. I think they think they're maintaining some integrity, but I just disagree. And I think that when they get this political, which is not related to promoting Rand, it can't be related to promoting Rand because Rand isn't alive to choose a candidate. So when they start going in on these elections and start talking about the candidates and all of that, I think it's a disservice to the movement.
Well, it would be one thing for them to say, I'm going to vote for this candidate, and here's why. It's when they come and say, oh, if you don't vote for this candidate, you're not an objectivist, or you're a fifth column objectivist. And that's what Barney does. He uses Yaron's fifth column speech to demonstrate his example. And then, he defines apologist as anyone who defends something controversial. Barney then relates how Peikoff also saw Yaron's words about Trump as an insult to Peikoff too. Now, I think this is much more why objectivism has suffered, being seen as almost libertarians who cave to the left by punching right.
Yaron said that on his show, so it's important to establish that, which causes a little distance. There's a little distance between his show and ARI, but he is the leader of the ARI movement, that wing of the objectivist movement. So it's a little confusing when he makes such profound statements as, you know, if you're an apologist for Trump, you can't be an objectivist, especially when he's not exactly using the proper words and he has to take it back or explain what he means later. This causes dissent, and since he's so associated with the objectivist movement, a lot of objectivists try to, you know, take his words, and they think that is representative of ARI.
Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
but then you also have the issue of when ARI did like a conference call or something about the election, and they were basically all attacking Trump. There was nobody there to give the positive case for voting for Trump, or you know, disagreeing with the ARI intellectuals, when Peikoff, who founded ARI, was going to vote for Trump. So it's clear that the intellectuals at ARI were wanted to express this political opinion, and they didn't want to bring anyone on who would disagree with them.
Yeah. Now, Barney also, to this point, claims that some objectivists, including Leonard Peikoff, say that they do not and cannot listen to Yaron scoffing and strident blaming. Now, is it fair to say Yaron actually partially confirms that charge here?
I told Leonard Peikoff that I wish he listened to the show so that he could critique me, but he doesn't want to. So, you know, but we've actually had that discussion, right? And the things about the show he doesn't like.
I think he does partially confirm it, because he's saying that Leonard doesn't listen to the show. And if I listened to that whole clip before, and he's saying that there are aspects of the show Leonard doesn't like. So I think Barney's claim is a fair one. It might be a bit of an exaggeration, but it's clear that, you know, Leonard's not too interested in listening to Yaron, but it's not exactly clear why. Like, is it because of his style or something like that?
Yeah, and that if I had the opportunity, I'd love to ask Peikoff about that. But Barney, for his part, says in closing of this essay, it wouldn't be right to criticize ARI if it were achieving its goals and succeeding, but ARI is not achieving its goals. They may say that Barney's article is riddled with errors and distortions, but much of what I've described here, you have seen for yourself. And if you have questions about any of this, I encourage you to demand numbers and explanations from ARI. That seems like a relatively heartfelt, he believes that, you know, the evidence is empirical. He's like saying, look, you can see this.
Right. And to some extent, you can see it for yourself if you look. I did look, you know, at the history on the website. So there are aspects where clearly they have failed to achieve their goal, at least achieve, you know, increase in numbers in certain areas. And I don't think that 2020 pipeline worked. I think they have admitted that, and they're working on some other strategy. I think they're going generally in a decent direction now, but they haven't gone far enough. Like I said, I think they need to go even, try to affect even younger minds, try to get parents involved, develop some sort of parenting course or literature, or some sort of techniques for parents, kind of in the Montessori tradition. I know that they seem to be just putting their weight into the Montessori, because Ray Gurn has his Montessori
Right.
course schools, I believe. So I think that's a very positive move. But maybe there's some refinement that could be made, and but really, my other main point is that there needs to be some hard look at objectivism and self-criticism, self-evaluation, and figure out, what is wrong, if anything, with objectivism, and how can it be fixed. There needs to be more support for critics and dissidents who are reasonable, and people that they can work with. And I think there's plenty of independent objectivists that they could be working with to try to figure out, some of the problems with objectivism. And I do have one other point, but I'll let you comment if you have some
I
comment
was
on
just
that.
going to say that Barney kind of makes your point. He says, it is up to you to weigh the facts and results and decide for yourself. And I do hope you will ask questions and decide for yourself. To have a vibrant, successful Ayn Rand Institute, major contributors and senior objectivists need to step up with courage and conviction and insist upon changes. ARI must have a new strategy. I agree.
Yeah. Well, they allow dissent in certain areas. So, like with Harry Binswanger, he's like the most extreme open borders person. They should allow that sort of dissent, but with actual principles and applications that are not considered, essential to the core objectivist philosophy. If there's something that is potentially changeable or can, potentially be wrong, they should allow dissent in that area. And obviously you don't allow dissent on something like objective reality. Like, obviously you got to believe in objective reality, you got to believe in reason. But when you get to the more applied sciences like ethics and morale and politics, I think there's room for error. There was room for error there on Rand's part, and we should try to figure out where those errors are.
Yeah, I mean, ARI is not going to do that for you, but I think there's something to that. Now, Barney finishes by calling out various people in the movement to rise up and ask questions. And I mean, sadly, some of the people he asked were like Binswanger and Peter Schwartz, who ended up, coming after Biddle and Barney a couple of months later is the beginning of officially schisming them from the movement, as Yaron called it. I mean, it was almost like the opening of Jerry Maguire. It's like not many followed Barney out the door because, they know that asking questions means you're going to be next on the plank.
Well, it could be. I think it depends on which questions and how you ask them. But yeah, certainly if you disagree with certain people at ARI or certain aspects of the philosophy, then you're going to get booted. That's pretty clear.
Yeah. Now, and in fairness, I want to offer what is probably Yaron's most effective counter argument. He asks why Barney is only recently concerned with the Ayn Rand Institute's problems.
There are a lot of questions you could ask Carl Barney if he was on the board. Was on the board for 25 years, something like that. While all these failures were supposed to be happening, what did he do about it? He's only been advocating for change in the last few years.
I don't think it's unreasonable that a person can start to harbor doubts, even if they keep them to themselves for a while, like any relationship. But I think a lot of people who truly love ARI hold their tongue about thinking they could be doing more than, OAC classes or essay contests. And part of the reason they hold their tongue is they don't want to be seen as hurting the movement. And just because, getting kicked out of ARI prompted him to review much of what had happened in a different light, it doesn't make the charges arbitrary. I mean, ARI could offer more context if it chose to. And again, based on that Rand quote at the beginning, do you think Rand would want them to? Saying that, that to not give reasons for a condemnation is a moral hit and run. And, it just goes back. Is ARI failing? Is it stagnating, or is it succeeding?
Yeah, there might be different reasons why Barney didn't come out earlier against these ARI programs, or point out the failures. And I think this is a problem, though, for Barney. I think that there's a big question here of why was he giving so much money to ARI if he was seeing them fail, if he wasn't getting results. And why did he suddenly take this big interest in ARI? I think it was he claims he started taking an interest, I think, in 2015 or something like that.
Well, that's when, that's in his story about what happened. That's when he really started asking them for a strategic plan and started questioning them.
So my question is, why then? What happened? I guess based on my own research, it was about 2015 where they were giving less free books, or the free books program wasn't taking off. And they were probably getting less OAC students. So he probably started noticing some of that. That's my guess. But I'd like to hear more about, exactly why he stuck with ARI for so long and gave them so much money, when in 2015 they had already been on this funnel pipeline mission for 10 or 15 years by then, and clearly it wasn't working. So
it's a combination. He not only is he giving them money, but he's also the big VIP there that for the most part they're not saying no to when he's suggesting things. Even though Yaron didn't really want to go along with the mediation program, he still did it because the big donor was asking. And I'm sure that has to be part of what's fun, to be the big guy that everyone respects. And I think he loved objectivism, and that's part of why he let it go for as long as he did. But as he was starting to make demands and they were pushing back on him, the relationship deteriorated over the next 3-4 years.
Yeah. It's what's interesting is ARI did announce the rapprochement. They had some article they wrote saying they were resuming cooperation with the objective standard.
Right.
And they actually advertised that article on the website under one of the sections. I think it was about ARI. And so even though they wrote that article on their blog, they did announce it on their actual website. So it seems like they were on board with rapprochement, but then something after that happened.
Right. But that Barney says that they were on board with your rapprochement, but that he believes it was OnCar that blew it up.
Yeah. So clearly they were on track for rapprochement. And then I think what happened is the issue over table displays kind of blew up. So they weren't allowing Craig to display his table at ARI events, and then that caused.
It blew up because they weren't giving rapprochement a real chance.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds that way, and it probably had something to do with ARI authors not publishing in his magazine. But it was probably a combination of factors, and I just think that we need to know more about why ARI refused to allow Craig to display a table at their events. It's like it seems like that was a little bit of a petty excuse they gave, that he was going to like pressure the students about objectivism. That seems ridiculous. Isn't the mission to try to introduce people to objectivism? So why would that even be a problem for ARI? I don't understand.
They're going to file that under things you shouldn't ask about. But I want to get to just this basic point. Is ARI failing or succeeding? And my concern is that it's neither, that it's in like this limbo state where they still are getting some, donors and some events, but that it's growing slower, or at least just staying still, while these other, ideologies take more precedence in the culture. And that's something that's, more difficult to see than outright failing.
Yeah. How do you measure cultural change? One of the big goals of ARI is to develop or foster this culture of reason and egoism. So how do you measure this? And how do you measure ARI's impact or the effect ARI has on creating such a culture? Because there's a lot of organizations who are promoting reason or even promoting capitalism. So how do you separate all the influences and just focus on ARI's influence and how they're influencing the culture? And one of the things you can look at is media mentions, things like that, and how often you get on TV. And I think one of the glaring issues right now is that, Yaron used to be on TV a lot, and I don't think he's on TV as much anymore.
Yeah, I think he does maybe one show in Great Britain. He started going on the conservative network over there. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That's a good catch. He stopped doing Tucker Carlson probably around the same time he started attacking him.
Probably,
but
yeah.
He stopped doing Tucker like 10 years ago, even when Amy Peikoff was still doing his show, a couple of years ago.
Yeah. So it's a question of why is he not on TV anymore? Is it because of ideas he was promoting, his own ideas he was promoting, or because of Ayn Rand's ideas he was promoting? Like if he's promoting Ayn Rand's ideas and they don't like him, then that's just a flaw of objectivism. It's not appealing to these people. But if he's promoting his own
subjectivism per se, it may be in the presentation.
Could be. I mean, but if ARI is sponsoring his appearances on TV and he's promoting his own ideas, and then that gets him booted from media, that's, I think, a problem. I think, ARI shouldn't be promoting people who are getting booted from media because of their own ideas instead of Ayn Rand's ideas.
Well, comparatively, he's still their best media person compared to anyone else at ARI.
Yeah, I suppose. I can't think of anyone else. I mean, Alex Epstein isn't with ARI anymore, but I think he gets on more media now than a lot of ARI people.
Did he think splitting with ARI was conducive in that regard?
I don't know if he split with ARI, but he left ARI.
Right.
Yeah, I think he's still a friend of Yaron and Don.
Yeah, absolutely. But he may have come to his own math that he was going to have kind of a freer reign doing his own, group.
Right. I mean, his group is still sponsored by one of the big donors. I think he gets money from somebody. Yeah. I forget who it is. I think Carl Barney. I think Carl Barney actually sponsored his group for a while. I don't know. I
think he did it one time. I doubt he is anymore. And I heard Alex take your own side when this all came out.
Yeah, I don't know who's backing Alex right now.
Yeah, but Well, I'm glad he's out there, but be that as it may, I'm glad we've talked about a lot of these issues. I think, going back to this Rand quote, that if you're going to start condemning people, you owe it to reality to state your reasons.
Well, I think it's true. I think you at least need to be able to support your conclusion. So if you just announce your conclusion, and then if people demand your evidence, then you should be able to give them your evidence. I don't think you should hide behind some sort of private versus public dispute or reasoning. I think if you're giving a moral evaluation of someone, then you're saying that they are misrepresenting the truth, or you're making some claim about their honesty, then you should be able to back it up. And I think it's only fair to your public, the people that you're speaking to. Because if you're having like a talk with someone just in private, and you said, "Oh, Joe Schmo, he's a real jerk. He's always misrepresenting what I say," and blah blah blah, and then your friend asks you, "Well, what do you mean?" and you're not willing to engage in that conversation and give him evidence, then that's on you. You
That's
shouldn't
right.
have spoken in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, that's, I think we touched on some really good material. I think we did a good analysis of the charges. We'll see if this sparks any conversation within Ayn Rand fandom.
Well,
And,
before we end, can I bring up one more thing?
Absolutely.
So when you read about ARI's mission, or you listen to ARI talk about their goals, you rarely hear about two aspects of the philosophy, which are metaphysics and aesthetics. They always talk about they want to foster a culture of reason and egoism and capitalism, but they don't ever really highlight the metaphysics or the art theory. And I like that to change. I think there are a lot of objectivist artists now who need some sort of support or could use it, or maybe there's some way they can consult with ARI and offer some training in OAC. I don't know if there's an art class in OAC or not, but I think there is a whole objectivist aesthetic theory that can be focused on and can help develop artists within the objectivist community. And there's also a whole aspect of the metaphysics that hasn't even been touched, and that can be investigated and researched and talked about, and maybe that can help objectivists relate more to Christians who aren't necessarily full-blown mystics, but just kind of believe in the Christian moral system and reject a lot of the metaphysics. So I think there's a whole aspect of the philosophy in these two fields that ARI doesn't really focus on, and I would like to see them do something with that.
Well, that's very optimistic thinking. I think that someone in the movement should do that. I think ARI might be more inclined to listen to Barney's suggestions first.
Maybe, but I consider this part of the failure. Part of the failure is not doing research into these areas.
Yeah.
And not putting them forward as a focus, right? I think they're way too focused on politics and writing these op-eds on current issues, and not focused enough on elaborating on metaphysics and aesthetics and pumping that information out to the culture.
When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If all you can do is teach, then teaching must be the only answer.
I guess.
Or travel. Well, that's great. These are some really good insights, something to think about. We'll leave it open for the comments section for people to add what they think of your thoughts at the end there. Any other final thoughts?
Nope, that's pretty much it.
Okay, great. Well, I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. This is the Ayn Rand Fan Club, and we will see you next time.